Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really somber, historic piece of true crime. We're going to walk through the facts, the evidence, and the timeline of a tragedy that literally shook the nation and completely altered the landscape of Austin, Texas. I'm talking about the events of December 1991, widely known as the yogurt shop murders. Now, just a heads up, the subject matter today is definitely heavy, but by digging into the facts we've gathered here, we can get a much better grasp on the massive investigative effort that followed and the ongoing quest for justice.
30-plus years. That is how long this haunting mystery has remained completely unsolved. More than 3 decades have passed since this crime happened, and in that time, investigators have chased down thousands, literally thousands of leads, and yet, the answers still completely defy them. So, how does a case with this much intense scrutiny stay open for over a quarter of a century? Well, to understand that, we've got to go back to the very beginning and see exactly how this whole thing unfolded.
Section 1. A normal Friday night, December 6, 1991, in Austin, Texas. Okay, let's dive into this. On that evening, inside the shop, there were 4 innocent teenage girls. 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison and 17-year-old Eliza Thomas were just working their regular shifts. Keeping them company as the shop got ready to close were 2 younger visitors, Jennifer's 15-year-old sister Sarah Harbison and her friend, 13-year-old Amy Ayers. They were just hanging out, chatting as the night went on, and the very last customers headed out. By all accounts, everything about the evening seemed completely, wonderfully normal.
And there's this incredibly tragic contrast to that night. On one hand, you have the broader Austin community where it was just an ordinary Friday evening. Families were wrapping up dinner, holiday lights were out, there was that festive cheer in the air. But on the flip side of that coin, nobody could have possibly imagined that one of America's most disturbing crimes was taking place right then. Because by sunrise, 4 innocent lives would be gone, and that everyday, popular yogurt shop would be nothing but ashes. The devastation they found the next morning would alter these families' lives forever.
Section 2. The Fire and Discovery, a crime scene hidden in ashes.
The way things escalated that night was just terrifyingly rapid. Like we said, on the evening of December 6th, it was business as usual. But then, just after midnight, emergency lines started lighting up. Firefighters rushed to the scene to find flames absolutely erupting from inside the yogurt shop. Now, they did manage to bring the fire under control fairly quickly, but as the sun came up, the reality set in. The shop was a burned-out shell, and tragically, the fire was really only the beginning of the horror here.
Because what the firefighters discovered inside is, well, it's truly difficult to comprehend. The bodies of all 4 girls were found in the back of the store. Investigators ultimately pieced together a horrific sequence of events. The girls had been tied up, sexually assaulted, and then shot. And only after all of that was the building set on fire. The absolutely crucial thing to understand here is that this fire was no accident. Investigators determined it was intentionally set specifically to destroy evidence and cover the killer's tracks.
Section 3. The Massive Investigation, Searching for Answers in Texas.
The scale of the police response to this was just staggering. The department mobilized immediately. They interviewed hundreds of witnesses, and they weren't just getting local help either. Thousands of tips started pouring in from all across the country. Detectives meticulously combed through the charred rubble, and they actually managed to collect fingerprints, DNA evidence, and shell casings. They rigorously analyzed burned materials. We even had several witnesses report seeing suspicious men near the shop earlier that evening, which led artists to sketch composites and push them out to the public. So the department was just absolutely flooded with forensic data and fresh leads.
But despite that massive, overwhelming mountain of investigative work, the answers just wouldn't come. Months slowly turned into years. All those interviews, all the shell casings, the composite sketches, none of it resulted in a definitive suspect actually being linked to the crime. Just imagine being one of those family members, waiting and hoping as the case went completely cold.
Section 4. Arrests and False Hope, the breakthrough that wasn't.
Now, what's really interesting here is that nearly a decade after the tragedy, a sudden twist shocked the nation. In 1999, investigators arrested 4 young men. At the time, it felt like the ultimate relief for a grieving community. The families finally believed their agonizing wait was over. But years later, intense legal battles would lead to those convictions being entirely overturned. Talk about brutal emotional whiplash, right? So what exactly happened? How do you go from having 4 suspects in custody to the convictions just being thrown out?
Well, it all came down to how those arrests were actually made. Police firmly believed they had the killers, but that belief was based almost entirely on confessions obtained during incredibly lengthy interrogations. When the news broke back then, it gave the public and the victims' families this immense false hope that the mystery was finally solved.
The authorities had confessions on the record, so it really seemed like an open and shut case. Section 5. The case falls apart. Confessions versus evidence.
But there was a stark, fatal divide that ultimately tore the prosecution's case apart. See, on one side you had these confessions, but the problem was the statements contradicted each other, and because they were obtained during such grueling, lengthy interrogations, defense attorneys argued they were entirely coerced. Then, on the other side, the physical evidence told a drastically different story. The details in the confessions just didn't match the actual crime scene. But the biggest blow? The physical DNA evidence completely failed to connect the suspects to the murders. Ultimately, prosecutors had to admit that the evidence just wasn't reliable enough to move forward.
So as the courts reviewed the evidence, the convictions were overturned and the suspects were released. And just like that, the murders officially had no convicted killer once again. The families were absolutely devastated, forced to relive all that trauma, while investigators found themselves right back at square one at the very beginning of the investigation.
Section 6. An unsolved true crime mystery. The search continues today.
But despite all these massive setbacks, there's still a persistent thread of hope today. The Austin Police Department flat out refuses to close the case. Detectives are continually reviewing the DNA evidence they preserved, and they're now applying modern forensic technology to it. Incredibly, new tips still arrive from time to time, even today. The big driving force behind the ongoing investigation right now is the hope that continuous advances in forensic science might someday finally identify the person or people responsible for this terrible crime.
There's a quote from the source material that I think perfectly captures the heartbreaking essence of this entire explainer. It says, "Sometimes the greatest mystery isn't how a crime happened, it's why no one has ever been held accountable." After more than 30 years, thousands of leads, and decades of agonizing waiting by the families, the identity of the killers remains entirely unknown.
Which really leaves us with this final lingering question. Will modern technology finally solve a 1991 crime? If justice is ever going to be served for Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy, it may very well come through scientific methods that didn't even exist on that cold December night. Until that day comes, the yogurt shop murders remain one of the darkest, most enduring unsolved mysteries in American history. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer and for taking the time to truly understand the facts of this deeply important case.